The notification sound pierced through the silence of Sarah's bedroom at 2:47 a.m., illuminating her face with the cold blue glow of her phone screen. What she saw in that moment would shatter everything she believed about the man she thought she'd spend forever with. Sarah Martinez had always been the type of woman who believed in fairy tales. At 28, she worked as a marketing coordinator for a small firm in downtown Portland, living in a cozy apartment with her rescue cat, Milo. Her life was simple, predictable, and exactly how she liked it until she met David Chen at a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning 6 months ago. David was everything Sarah had ever dreamed of in a partner. Tall, with kind brown eyes and a smile that made her stomach flutter, he worked as a software engineer and seemed to have his life perfectly together. Their first date lasted 7 hours, talking until the restaurant staff had to politely ask them to leave. He brought her flowers on their second date, not roses, but her favorite sunflowers, which she had mentioned only once in passing. By month 3, David was staying over most nights. He cooked her breakfast, left sweet notes in her lunch bag, and never failed to text her good morning and good night. He told her he loved her on a moonlit beach in California during their weekend getaway, and Sarah felt like she was living in one of those romantic movies she'd watched countless times. "I want to spend the rest of my life making you this happy," David whispered against her ear as they watched the waves crash against the shore. "You're my forever, Sarah. My everything." Sarah believed him completely. How could she not when he looked at her like she hung the stars in the sky? The ring came 2 months later, not in a fancy restaurant or during an elaborate proposal, but on a quiet Sunday morning as they made pancakes together. David got down on one knee right there in her kitchen, flour still dusting his hands, and asked her to marry him. Sarah said yes before he even finished the question, tears streaming down her face as he slipped the modest but beautiful diamond onto her finger. Their engagement was everything Sarah had imagined. David was attentive, loving, and seemed genuinely excited about planning their future together. They looked at apartments, talked about children, and spent hours discussing their dream wedding. Sarah felt like the luckiest woman alive. But love, as Sarah was about to learn, sometimes wears a mask that eventually slips away in the darkness. It started with small things. David's phone would buzz late at night, and he'd quickly flip it face down with a sheepish smile. "Just work stuff," he'd say, but Sarah noticed how his jaw tensed when she asked about it. He started staying late at the office more often, coming home exhausted and distant. When Sarah suggested they spend more time together, David would pull her close and promise they'd have a romantic weekend soon, but those weekends never seemed to materialize. Then came the password changes. David had always been open with his phone, sometimes even asking Sarah to text people back for him when he was driving. But suddenly, his phone was locked with a passcode Sarah didn't know, and when she jokingly asked what it was, David's response was sharp and defensive. "Why do you need to know? Don't you trust me?" The question stung because Sarah did trust him, completely and without reservation. So she pushed down the uncomfortable feeling growing in her chest and told herself she was being paranoid. The night everything changed, David had fallen asleep on the couch while they were watching a movie. Sarah had gone to bed alone, something that was becoming more frequent lately. She was just drifting off to sleep when she heard his phone buzzing repeatedly from the living room. At first, she tried to ignore it, but the constant notification sounds were keeping her awake. Sarah padded quietly to the living room, intending to just silence his phone so they could both sleep. David was sound asleep, his phone lying face up on the coffee table, the screen lighting up again and again with incoming messages. That's when Sarah saw the name that made her blood run cold, Emma, followed by a heart emoji. The most recent message preview was partially visible. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night, baby. I've missed your touch so much." Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the phone screen. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Emma? She'd never heard David mention anyone named Emma. And that message, it was intimate in a way that made Sarah's stomach churn. Before she could stop herself, Sarah picked up the phone. Her heart pounded as she tried to guess the passcode. Their anniversary date didn't work. Her birthday didn't work. On her third try, she entered David's birthday, and the phone unlocked. What Sarah found in those messages destroyed her world in an instant. Months of conversations filled the screen. Photos she couldn't bear to look at for more than a second. Plans for secret meetings and romantic getaways that Sarah had never been told about. Emma wasn't just some random woman, she was David's co-worker, the one he'd mentioned casually a few times as just a friend from the office. But the messages told a different story. They revealed a relationship that had been going on for almost as long as Sarah and David had been together. Emma didn't know about Sarah either. Based on the messages Sarah could barely bring herself to read. David had been living a double life, telling both women they were his everything, his forever. The most devastating message was from just 3 days ago, right after David and Sarah had spent an afternoon picking out wedding invitations. "I can't wait to marry you, Em. You're the love of my life. Just give me a little more time to figure out how to end things with Sarah gently." Sarah sank onto the couch, David's phone clutched in her shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. The man sleeping peacefully next to her, the man who had promised her forever just hours ago while they argued about font choices for their invitations, had been planning to leave her for another woman. All those late nights at the office, all those password changes, all those moments when David seemed distant, it all made sense now. Sarah thought about all the times she'd questioned her own instincts, all the times she'd pushed down her concerns because she trusted the man she loved. As she sat there in the darkness, surrounded by the ruins of everything she'd believed about her life, Sarah realized that the hardest part wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that David's love had never been real, not the way hers was. While she was planning their future, he was planning his escape to another woman's arms. The morning light was starting to filter through the windows when David finally stirred. Sarah was still sitting on the couch, his phone in her lap, the evidence of his deception spread out in digital black and white. When David opened his eyes and saw her sitting there, the look of panic that crossed his face told Sarah everything she needed to know. Some promises of forever, Sarah learned that night, are just pretty lies whispered in the dark. But sometimes, discovering the truth, no matter how much it hurts, is the first step toward finding a real love that doesn't hide in the shadows of secret messages and midnight deceptions. The engagement ring on Sarah's finger caught the morning light as she finally stood up, ready to reclaim her life from the beautiful lie she'd been living.